The Galactic Council, a vast assembly of powerful species, convened in the heart of the Starspire Citadel. The Citadel itself was a massive structure, a fusion of advanced technology and ancient stone. It hovered above a shimmering nebula, a symbol of the galaxy's unity. Representatives from countless worlds gathered within the council hall. There were towering alien beings with multiple eyes, sleek humanoids with silvery skin, and creatures whose forms shifted like shadows. Yet, despite the diversity of the galaxy, there was one thing they all shared in common: their indifference. Today, the topic of the Zorians was at the center of the meeting. The Zorians were an ancient alien race that once played a vital role in maintaining peace and cooperation across the galaxy. Their knowledge of the cosmos, their art, and their wisdom were unparalleled. They had been the guardians of knowledge and peace for centuries. But now, Zoria, their homeworld, was on the brink of destruction. An unknown enemy, known only as the Vraks, had begun a systematic invasion of the planet. The Vraks were powerful, merciless, and efficient. In the wake of their arrival, entire cities on Zoria had been reduced to ruins. Yet, instead of rushing to the Zorians' aid, the galaxy had turned a blind eye. In the Grand Council Hall, voices filled the air, rising and falling in a cacophony of debate. The representatives of the Andar, a race of tall, luminous beings, were the first to speak. "We cannot spare the resources to protect the Zorians," one of their leaders, a figure of shimmering light, said. "Their time has passed. We have our own worlds to protect. The Vraks are a threat to all of us, but we cannot afford to weaken ourselves further by involving ourselves in this lost cause." A murmur of agreement spread through the council. The Vraks were a growing threat, and many feared they would soon target other worlds. The humans, a species that had only recently joined the galactic stage, sat at the back of the room, watching as the council deliberated. Their presence in the council chamber was new, and they had no significant political power. Still, they had a voice, and they were not about to remain silent. As the conversation grew colder, a human representative, Ambassador Sarah Winters, stood up. She was a young woman with fiery red hair and determination in her eyes. Her voice rang out, cutting through the murmurs of the council. "With all due respect," Sarah began, her voice steady but firm, "you're making a grave mistake. The Zorians are not just some outdated relic. They've been allies to many of us, including some of your own species, and if we abandon them now, what does that say about us? What does that say about the very values we cling to hold dear? I don't believe the Vraks should be allowed to wipe them out simply because they're no longer deemed useful." The council hall fell silent. The eyes of the representatives shifted toward Sarah. Some of them, particularly those from the older races, looked at her with disdain. Humans were still a young species, unpredictable and impulsive. What did they know of the galaxy's politics and struggles? But Sarah didn't back down. She knew the stakes were high, and she also knew that if the galaxy didn't act, the Zorians would be lost. "I understand that we are all facing our own challenges," Sarah continued, "but this is not just about politics or resources. It's about what kind of future we want to create. If we leave the Zorians to their fate, what will stop other races from doing the same when we're in need?" The room remained silent for a moment. And then the human delegate from Earth, a tall man named Captain David Alvarez, stood. His voice, calm and measured, carried the weight of someone who had seen the horrors of war firsthand. "If the council won't act, then Earth will," David said. "We may be new to this galaxy, but we're not blind. We've seen what happens when good people turn their backs on those in need. We are prepared to offer the Zorians our help. If you will not protect them, we will." The murmur that followed was mixed. Some were shocked, others amused. But one thing was certain: humanity had just made a bold statement. They had no intention of standing idly by while an entire race was wiped from the face of the galaxy. Despite their lack of experience, the humans were ready to step up and fight for what was right. The council leader, a towering figure of stone and metal known as Rakor, spoke slowly, his voice deep and gravelly. "You are an interesting species, humans. You have a passion and a spirit that is rare among the galaxy's older races. But you are outmatched. The Vraks are not a threat you can simply confront." The two leaders worked quickly, formulating a plan to infiltrate the Vraks' heavily fortified shipyards where the Colossus was being built. The operation would be risky, and there was little chance of success if the humans and Zorians didn't work together as one cohesive force. As night fell on the planet, the combined forces of the Zorians and humans prepared for their most dangerous mission yet. Small teams of elite soldiers from both races were selected for the operation. They would need to move fast, strike with precision, and get out before the Vraks realized what was happening. The stakes couldn't have been higher. "We'll need to approach from the north, through the canyons," said Yadira, her voice calm but filled with urgency. "The Vraks are watching the main routes. We'll use the terrain to stay hidden." David surveyed the map spread out before them. "We'll take a small, fast strike force. The rest of the team will create a distraction to draw the Vraks away. We'll hit the Colossus before they can finish construction, and we'll make sure it never sees battle." The plan was set. Under the cover of darkness, the teams mobilized. The air was tense as humans and Zorians alike climbed into their ships, preparing to enter the heart of enemy territory. Yadira and David shared one last look before they boarded their respective craft. There was no turning back now. The journey to the Vraks shipyards was long, but it was the quiet that made it unsettling. As the small fleet flew through the dark sky, a nervous anticipation filled the air. Both the humans and Zorians knew what was at stake. Zoria's fate hung in the balance. If they failed, it would be the end. If they succeeded, it would be a turning point in the war. The mission began with precision. The teams split into smaller groups, each tasked with infiltrating different parts of the Vraks shipyards. They moved silently, using advanced cloaking technology to remain undetected. As they approached the Colossus, they saw it, huge, dark, and looming, its surface shimmering with ominous energy. Yadira's heart raced as she glanced at David through the cockpit's display. "We're here," she said quietly. David's voice crackled through the comms, steady and reassuring. "We're not leaving without completing the mission." They descended toward the massive ship, ready to infiltrate the Vraks' heavily guarded defenses. Every moment counted. The Vraks Colossus was their only target, and they had to destroy it before it could unleash its full power. The fate of Zoria rested in their hands. The Vraks shipyards were a vast expanse of dark, industrial structures, humming with activity. Massive machines and energy shields buzzed in the distance, and Vraks soldiers patrolled every corner of the area. The Zorian and human forces moved silently through the shadows, their steps measured and deliberate. Each of them knew that one mistake could mean the end of the mission, and the end of Zoria. Commander Yadira led the main strike team, her blue skin blending into the dark surroundings as she moved swiftly across the rocky terrain. The team, a mix of Zorians and humans, followed closely behind her. Their objective was clear: infiltrate the heart of the shipyard, disable the Colossus before it could be fully activated, and escape without being detected. David Alvarez, leading the second team, stayed in constant communication with Yadira through their secure channels. "We're in position," he reported, his voice low but steady, proceeding with the distraction plan. On the other side of the shipyards, a group of Zorian and human soldiers had set up explosives to create a diversion. The goal was simple: draw as many Vraks soldiers away from the Colossus as possible, giving Yadira's team the opportunity to slip through undetected. David's team waited, tense, as the countdown for the diversion began. The seconds stretched on, each one more nerve-wracking than the last. Finally, a series of explosions echoed across the shipyards, sending plumes of smoke and fire into the air. The ground shook with the force of the blasts, and alarms began to wail, signaling the Vraks that something had gone wrong. "Now, Yadira," David said, his fingers gripping the controls of his ship tightly. Without hesitation, Yadira led her team forward, darting between the shadows of towering metal structures. The explosions had done their job. Vrax's soldiers rushed toward the source of the disturbance, leaving the path to the Colossus largely unguarded. The team advanced quickly, hearts pounding in their chests. Yadira nodded, though she didn't feel any relief. The air in the room felt thick with the weight of their mission. The stakes had never been higher. They were facing the might of the Vrax military, and this warship was their ultimate weapon. If they failed, Zoria would fall. If they succeeded, it would be the first real blow to the Vrax's invasion. A loud crash sounded from the hallway outside the control room, followed by the unmistakable clamor of approaching Vrax soldiers. They had found them. "Get ready," Yadira called to the team, drawing her weapon and taking a defensive position beside the door. The others quickly followed suit, weapons at the ready. The Colossus's control room was small, but it had one narrow exit, which was now their only means of defense. David's voice crackled through the comms, though his words were barely audible over the growing sounds of gunfire in the distance. "We're not far behind. Hold your position until we can reach you." Yadira clenched her jaw, trying to ignore the fear building in her chest. David and his team were close, but not close enough. She had to trust that they could keep the Vrax at bay long enough for Kallo to finish his work. "I can do this," Kallo shouted suddenly, his face lighting up with determination. "The system's down. I'm initiating the shutdown sequence." Yadira's heart leaped into her throat. "Hurry," she urged. Just as the words left her mouth, the door to the control room burst open with a deafening crash. The Vrax soldiers stormed in, weapons raised and ready to fire. Yadira and her team opened fire without hesitation, taking down 2 of the soldiers before they could even react. The rest dove for cover, returning fire as the room erupted into chaos. Yadira's eyes flicked to Kallo, who was still glued to the console, his fingers flying over the buttons. The team was doing their best to hold back the Vrax, but they were vastly outnumbered, and every shot that missed felt like a gamble they couldn't afford to take. "Get to the core," Yadira shouted to the rest of the team, her voice sharp with command. "I'll cover Kallo. We don't have time to waste." 2 of the soldiers nodded and sprinted toward the core reactor. As they moved, they returned fire, trying to keep the Vrax at bay long enough to finish the mission. But the Vrax were relentless. The soldiers were heavily armed, and with every moment that passed, it seemed as though the door would give way to an overwhelming force of Vrax troops. "Kallo, it's almost time," Yadira called out, her breath coming in quick gasps. She kept her weapon trained on the door, firing whenever a Vrax soldier tried to move closer. "Can you shut it down now?" Kallo was focused entirely on the console, his face determined but tense. "Just a few more seconds. I need to override the last command." The door buckled under the weight of the Vrax assault. With a final loud crash, the door was torn off its hinges, and a squad of Vrax soldiers charged into the room, weapons blazing. Yadira fired without thinking, taking out one soldier and then another, but the room was starting to fill with too many enemies. "I've got it," Kallo shouted suddenly. The console beeped loudly, signaling that the shutdown sequence had been completed. The Colossus is offline. At that exact moment, the reactor core began to hum, then sputter, and finally go silent. The mighty warship that had once seemed invincible was now powerless. Yadira exhaled in relief, but there was no time to celebrate. The Vrax soldiers, realizing their warship was now useless, turned their focus toward the team with a renewed fury. They advanced, closing in fast. "Retreat," Yadira ordered. "Get out of here." The team didn't need to be told twice. With the core deactivated, their mission was complete, but they still had to make it out alive. As they fell back, David's voice finally broke through the comms again. "We're here," he shouted. "We've got you covered. Fall back to the extraction point." Yadira, with Kallo and the others in tow, fought their way out of the control room. The Vrax soldiers were closing in on all sides, but David's team arrived just in time, forcing the enemy back with a volley of well-timed shots. The humans' superior tactics, combined with the Zorians' advanced weaponry, made for a powerful combination, and the Vrax found themselves struggling to keep up. With their path cleared, Yadira and her team sprinted for the extraction point, the adrenaline pushing them forward. As they ran, Yadira stole a glance back at the massive warship, now lifeless and silent. It was a small victory, but it was the victory they had needed. "We did it," Kalo said breathlessly as they reached their transport. "We really did it." Word of the victory spread quickly across Zoria. The Zorians, once demoralized and on the brink of surrender, began to rally. The humans had given them something they had lost, the belief that victory was still possible. And it wasn't just the Zorians who were inspired. The news of the humans' bravery and determination spread across the galaxy, reaching other races that had once dismissed them as insignificant. But the fight was far from over. The Vrax, realizing they were no longer facing an easy victory, began to regroup. Their forces were vast, and they were relentless. The humans, however, refused to back down. They had made a promise to the Zorians, and they would keep that promise, no matter the cost. As the days passed, the human and Zorian forces grew stronger. They became a united front, each side learning from the other. The humans had taught the Zorians to think outside the box, to use their environment and their creativity to outsmart the enemy. The Zorians had taught the humans to remain calm under pressure, to trust in their technology and their allies. Together, they were a formidable force. Captain David Alvarez stood alongside Commander Yadira as they looked out over a newly formed military base, a symbol of their shared struggle. The base was a testament to what they had achieved together. It was a place where humans and Zorians worked side by side, their differences put aside for the sake of a common goal. "We've come a long way," David said, his voice filled with quiet pride. Yadira nodded, her expression serious. "We still have a long way to go, but we're not alone anymore." As they stood there, watching the sun set over the planet's horizon, they both knew that the battle for Zoria was far from over. But one thing was clear: the humans had brought something to the fight that no one had expected. A new way of thinking, a new way of fighting, and above all, a new hope. The galaxy had underestimated humanity before, but now they were seeing just how powerful the will of a single species could be. The tide was turning, and the galaxy would never be the same again. The days after the successful raid on the Vrax supply depot were filled with a sense of cautious optimism. The Zorians and humans had begun to rebuild, their combined forces strengthening each day. However, the Vrax were not a race to sit idle after a setback. They were cunning, ruthless, and relentless, and they were not going to let a small group of rebels, no matter how brave or innovative, stand in the way of their conquest. Commander Yadira and Captain David Alvarez knew this all too well. They had won a small victory, but the war was far from over. The Vrax had been wounded, but they were still an unstoppable force. The galaxy's most powerful and terrifying enemy was not going to surrender easily. The Zorian military command had set up a series of defensive bases across the planet, with humans and Zorians working side by side. These bases were equipped with new human technology, making them better equipped for the challenges ahead. In the skies, a new fleet of ships, combining Zorian energy-based weapons with human maneuverability, patrolled the atmosphere. The plan was clear: defend the planet and disrupt the Vrax supply lines, preventing them from regrouping. But as the humans and Zorians prepared for the next phase of their fight, a new threat emerged, one that neither side had expected. Deep within the Vrax war fleet, a new type of warship was being constructed. The Vrax, having realized they had underestimated their opponents, had begun to develop a weapon capable of devastating entire cities in one strike. This new warship, called the Vrax Colossus, was massive, far larger than anything the Zorians had ever seen. Its hull was made of a material stronger than anything known in the galaxy, and its energy cannons were powerful enough to destroy entire landscapes in a single blast. The news of this new weapon reached the Zorian command center like a thunderclap. Yadira, her face pale as she looked at the data on her screen, felt a deep unease settle in her chest. If the Vraks launched this weapon, it could be the end of Zoria, she muttered to herself. We won't be able to defend against it. David, standing by her side, shared the same grim expression. The humans had fought hard, but even they knew that this new weapon might be too much for their combined forces to handle. We can't let them use it, David said firmly. We need to strike first, take it out before it can launch. Yadira nodded. Agreed, but we don't have much time. The Colossus is still in the construction phase, but it won't be for long. If we wait too long, it'll be too late. Yadira didn't say anything at first. She only nodded, her heart still racing. They had struck a blow to the Vraks, but the war was far from over. There would be more battles ahead. But for now, this moment of triumph was theirs. The extraction ship lifted off from the Vraks shipyard, its engines roaring as it soared into the dark sky. Yadira sat near the cockpit, her heart still pounding from the intense battle. The Colossus, once the greatest weapon of the Vraks fleet, was now nothing more than a dead hulk floating in space. Their mission was a success, but the war was not over. Kalo slumped into a seat, wiping sweat from his forehead. I still can't believe it, he said, looking at Yadira with wide eyes. We actually did it. We stopped the Colossus. David Alvarez sat across from them, checking his weapon before securing it in its holster. Yeah, he said with a small grin. And we're still alive. That's a bonus. Outside the ship's window, explosions rippled across the Vraks shipyard as the remaining human and Zorian forces finished their retreat. The sabotage mission had crippled the enemy's operations, but it had also drawn their full attention. The Vraks would not forget this loss. Commander Yadira turned to David. How are the others? She asked. David checked his communicator. Most of our forces made it out. A few injuries, but nothing too serious. The Vraks were too focused on stopping us to chase down the retreating ships. Yadira exhaled a breath of relief. Good, but this is only the beginning. David nodded. We've weakened them, but they're still dangerous. The Vraks will retaliate. We need to be ready. As if to confirm their fears, an alert sounded from the cockpit. The pilot, a skilled human named Lieutenant Ramy, turned back to face them. We've got incoming Vraks ships, he announced. They're in pursuit. Yadira stood immediately. How many? 3 war cruisers, Ramy replied. They're fast, but they're not at full power. Seems like they're scrambling whatever ships they have left. David smirked. Sounds like they're angry. Yadira didn't return his smile. Angry enemies are unpredictable. We need to lose them before we reach Zoria. Ramy adjusted the ship's controls. Hang on tight. I'm taking us into an asteroid field. It's risky, but it's the best way to shake them off. The ship suddenly swerved as it entered a dense region of floating asteroids. The massive rocks drifted in unpredictable patterns, illuminated only by the faint glow of distant stars. The Vraks ships followed, their weapons firing bright streaks of energy toward the escaping transport. Yadira grabbed onto the nearest support rail as the ship jolted violently. Ramy, we can't take too many hits. I know. Ramy shouted back, his hand steady on the controls. But if I slow down, we're done for. Kalo's fingers moved over the ship's navigation console. I'm redirecting energy to the shields. It won't last long, but it'll help. David braced himself as another explosion shook the ship. I really hope you have a plan. Ramy's eyes flicked to a cluster of particularly large asteroids up ahead. Yeah, we use those. Yadira followed his gaze and immediately understood. You're crazy. But it'll work, Ramy said, a grin forming on his face. Without waiting for approval, Ramy steered the ship straight toward the largest asteroid. The Vrak's ships, too determined to let them escape, followed closely. At the last possible second, Raimi pulled the ship into a sharp turn, skimming just above the asteroid's rocky surface. The Vrak's cruisers, unable to react in time, were forced to adjust their course. One of the enemy ships scraped against the asteroid, sending debris flying in all directions. The second Vrak's ship tried to maneuver, but collided with a smaller asteroid, its engines sputtering before exploding in a bright flash. The third cruiser hesitated, its pilot clearly realizing the danger. Raimi took advantage of the pause and pushed the ship to full speed, breaking out of the asteroid field. "We're clear," he announced. Yadira sighed in relief. That was reckless. David stood tall, his gaze unwavering. "Then we will learn. If we must, we will fight, and we will win, but we will not turn our backs." The decision was made. The Zorians would have to rely on the humans, the very species the galaxy had long dismissed. The future of an entire race now rested in the hands of a species still learning its place in the stars. But one thing was certain: the humans would not be ignored. As the meeting adjourned, Sarah and David exchanged a look of determination. The real battle was just beginning. Zoria was a planet unlike any other in the galaxy. It was a world of breathtaking beauty, with vast plains that stretched as far as the eye could see, crystalline trees that sparkled in the sunlight, and oceans that shimmered like liquid silver. Its towering mountain cities were carved with intricate designs, reflecting a long history of peace and culture. The Zorians themselves, tall and elegant beings with smooth blue skin, had once been at the center of galactic diplomacy. They had helped build alliances, shared knowledge, and acted as mediators in countless conflicts. But now, the planet stood on the brink of destruction. The Vraks, a powerful and ruthless alien species, had begun their invasion of Zoria with terrifying precision. Their warships, black as night and lined with sharp edges, hovered ominously above the planet. The Zorians, despite their advanced technology and wisdom, were ill-prepared for such a ruthless and overwhelming force. Their defensive systems, while sophisticated, had not been updated in centuries. The Vraks, with their advanced weaponry and brutal tactics, swept across Zoria's defenses like a storm. For weeks, the Zorians had fought back, but their chances were growing slimmer with each passing day. Cities fell, villages were abandoned, and the Zorians were forced to retreat into their underground bunkers. Their hope was fading, and many had resigned themselves to the fact that their once glorious civilization was coming to an end. On the surface of Zoria, a group of Zorian leaders met in a hidden command center. They were grim-faced, their once proud demeanor now shadowed by the weight of their situation. Among them was Commander Idira, a seasoned military leader who had fought in countless skirmishes over the years. She was tall, with silver hair that flowed down her back like a river of starlight. Her eyes, once bright with the promise of victory, now held only weariness. "The Vraks are relentless," Yadira said, her voice heavy with frustration. "They're too strong for us to push back. We've lost too much ground already." A younger officer, Lyra, stood beside her, looking out at the view of the battle raging across the horizon. "We need help," she said quietly. "The Council, the Galaxy, they've turned their backs on us." Yadira clenched her fists. "We cannot wait for help that will never come. We have to make a choice, fight until our last breath, or let Zoria fall into the hands of the Vraks." As the Zorians prepared for what seemed like their final stand, a strange series of events began to unfold. A fleet of ships appeared in the sky, human ships, small but powerful. They arrived without warning, landing just outside the cities that had not yet fallen. The Zorians had never seen these ships before, but their design was unmistakable. They were human vessels, sleek and compact, capable of withstanding enemy fire. Commander Yadira immediately ordered a team to investigate, unsure of whether these humans were allies or enemies. She had heard of the human delegation's bold statements at the Galactic Council, but to actually see them arrive in person was another matter entirely. After all, the galaxy's older races had long dismissed humans as an unimportant species. They had no place among the powerful alliances that ruled the stars. As Yadira and her team approached the human ships, a group of humans emerged. They were led by Captain David Alvarez, a man with short black hair and a determined look in his eyes. His posture was confident, but it was his voice that immediately caught Yadira's attention. "We're here to help," he said simply, as though the answer were obvious. "The Galactic Council may have turned its back on you, but we haven't. We believe in what the Zorians have done for the galaxy, and we won't let you fall." Yadira narrowed her eyes. "And why would you help us? The galaxy has abandoned us. Why should humans care?" David's eyes softened, and he stepped forward, his voice calm but firm. "Because it's the right thing to do. The Zorians have helped others for centuries. It's time for us to return the favor. We may not have the resources or power of the older races, but we have something just as important: determination. But effective," David added, laughing. The ship finally reached Zoria's orbit, and Yadira looked down at the planet below. The blue and green world shimmered against the darkness of space, its people still unaware of the battle that had just saved them. As the transport descended toward the capital, Yadira felt a mixture of exhaustion and pride. They had fought against impossible odds and won, but she knew this was only the beginning. The Vraks were still out there, still dangerous. But now, the Zorians and humans had hope. As the team disembarked, they were met with cheers from the resistance fighters. Yadira and David exchanged a glance, knowing that their fight was far from over. But for the first time in a long time, the tide had turned. Zoria had been saved, and humanity had proven, once again, that they would not stand by while innocent lives were threatened. They would fight, they would endure, and they would win. But as they neared the massive warship, something strange happened. A low rumble filled the air, followed by a sudden shift in the shipyard's energy shields. Yadira paused, scanning the area with caution. She had expected the Vraks to scramble, but this was different. The Colossus was not just a weapon. It was also a fortress, and its defenses were being heightened. "Stay alert," Yadira whispered to her team. "Something's wrong." The team continued moving, their footsteps muffled by the rocky ground. But the closer they got to the Colossus, the more the air seemed to crackle with energy. They were almost there when the ground trembled beneath them. The shipyard's central control system, now fully aware of their presence, activated automated defenses. Laser turrets rose from the ground, targeting the team. "Take cover," Yadira shouted, pulling her team to the safety of a nearby structure. Energy blasts lit up the night sky as the turrets fired, but the humans and Zorians were well trained, quickly moving into defensive positions. David's voice crackled in Yadira's earpiece. "We've got a problem on our side, too. The Vraks have activated their anti-air systems. I can't get any closer without risking an attack on your position. Do what you can to hold them off," Yadira ordered. "We'll handle this on the ground." The team waited for the fire from the turrets to subside before advancing once more. They had no choice but to push forward. They couldn't afford to waste any time. The Colossus loomed ahead, its massive hull dark and imposing. The warship had already begun its preparations for launch. Every moment they spent here was a moment closer to the destruction of Zoria. "We're almost there," said Kalo, a young Zorian engineer who was part of Yadira's team. He was nervous, his eyes constantly flicking to the rapidly changing energy readings on his handheld device. "We need to reach the core and disable the main reactor. That's the only way to stop the Colossus before it's too late." Yadira nodded. "Keep moving. Everyone stay focused." With renewed determination, the team pushed through the final stretch. The Colossus's massive energy shields were now in full operation, but the team used Zorian cloaking technology to remain unseen as they made their way toward the ship's central control tower. As they approached the towering structure, They could hear the faint hum of machinery and the steady rhythm of the Vrax workers preparing the warship for launch. Just as they reached the entrance to the control tower, a series of alarms went off. The Vrax had discovered their presence. "It's now or never," Yadira shouted, pushing the doors open. Inside, the control room was a labyrinth of cables, panels, and screens flashing with urgent warnings. The core reactor was at the center, surrounded by multiple layers of security. This was the heart of the Colossus, and it had to be destroyed if they were to stop it from being used in battle. Kalo quickly set to work, hacking into the security system to override the reactor's fail-safe mechanisms. "I'll need a few minutes," he called out, sweat dripping from his brow. Meanwhile, Yadira and the rest of the team set up defensive positions, preparing for the inevitable confrontation. The Vrax would soon be upon them, and there was no turning back. Time was running out. "Move faster, Kalo," Yadira urged, her pulse racing as the sound of approaching Vrax soldiers grew louder. Kalo's hands flew across the console, his eyes fixed on the screen. "I've almost got it, just a little more." Outside, the sound of Vrax footsteps echoed in the halls, and Yadira knew they didn't have much time left. The fate of Zoria and the galaxy rested in their hands. The control room of the Colossus was filled with a tense silence as Kalo worked furiously at the console. His fingers flew across the keys, sweat beading on his forehead. Every second counted now. The Vrax soldiers were closing in on their position, and the core reactor of the Colossus was mere moments away from being fully activated. If they didn't succeed in shutting it down, the massive warship would soon be ready to unleash its devastating power. Yadira stood watch, her senses on high alert. Her heart raced as she listened to the distant sounds of the Vrax forces advancing. She had no doubt that they would throw everything they had at them to stop the sabotage. It was a deadly game of time. "Kalo, how much longer?" Yadira asked, her voice strained with urgency. She knew the young engineer was doing his best, but the pressure of the moment was overwhelming. "I'm almost there," Kalo replied, his voice tight with concentration. "The system's more complicated than I expected. Just need to bypass the last layer of security." Yadira was taken aback by his words. She had expected a brash, impulsive response, but this human seemed different. He was not just talking about winning a war. He was talking about something deeper, something that transcended politics and resources. "We're willing to fight alongside you," David continued. "Together, we can stand against the Vrax. You don't have to face this alone." For the first time in weeks, Yadira allowed herself a small glimmer of hope. The humans were offering something the galaxy had refused to: solidarity, compassion, and the promise of a future where no one was left behind. Still, Yadira was cautious. "You may have the will to help, but do you have the means?" David nodded. "We've learned a lot in our short time among the stars. We've adapted quickly. We have new weapons, new tactics, and the willingness to do whatever it takes to protect those who need it most. If you'll have us, we're ready to fight." Yadira looked at the human leader, her mind racing with the possibilities. Could these humans really help them turn the tide? Or were they simply offering empty words? But something about David's expression, his certainty, stirred something deep inside her. "We'll fight with you," Yadira said, her voice steady. "For Zoria. For the future." The alliance between the humans and the Zorians was forged that day, a bond built not on necessity, but on mutual respect and the shared belief that even in the darkest moments, help could still come from unexpected places. The Zorians, once forgotten by the galaxy, had found new allies in a species that refused to let them fade into history. The decision had been made, and the alliance between the Zorians and the humans was formed. The humans had promised to help the Zorians defend their planet. And the Zorians, once skeptical of the humans' ability to make a difference, were beginning to see a glimmer of hope. The enemy, the Vrax, still loomed large on the horizon, but for the first time in weeks, the Zorians felt something they hadn't allowed themselves to feel in a long time: hope. The human fleet, though small compared to the Vraxes, was not to be underestimated. Earth's ships were built with the ingenuity and resourcefulness that humans were known for. Captain David Alvarez, who had been at the forefront of the human delegation, now led a team of engineers and strategists in partnership with the Zorians. Together, they began working tirelessly to develop new ways to defend the planet. One of the first things the humans introduced was their new form of warfare. The Zorians, with their advanced technology, had relied on large, powerful defense systems, but these had proven ineffective against the Vrax's superior firepower. The humans, however, were skilled in guerrilla tactics, something the Zorians had never considered. The humans taught the Zorians how to use the terrain of their planet to their advantage, how to camouflage their ships in the thick forests, how to create traps in the deep caves beneath the mountains, and how to attack the Vrax forces with precision rather than brute strength. For weeks, they worked together, forming a plan to take back what had been lost. The Zorians taught the humans how to use their energy-based weapons, while the humans shared their knowledge of strategy and innovation. They knew they had to be smarter, not stronger, if they were to stand a chance against the might of the Vrax. Commander Idira, who had been so doubtful of the humans at first, began to see the potential in their methods. The humans were quick learners, adapting to the Zorians' technology in a way that no one could have predicted. Their creativity and resourcefulness were unlike anything the galaxy had seen before. It wasn't long before the first of their joint missions was launched, a small-scale raid on a Vrax supply depot that had been feeding the invaders' army. Idira, David, and a team of both Zorians and humans led the mission. They moved swiftly and silently through the dense forests of Zoria, using stealth and precision to outmaneuver the Vrax. The Vrax, so used to their overwhelming force, had not expected a group as small as this to challenge them. They were caught off guard, and the raid was a success. The Zorians and humans had destroyed the supply depot, crippling the Vrax's ability to resupply their troops. The success of the mission sent a shockwave through the ranks of the Vrax. They had underestimated the humans, and now they were forced to rethink their strategy. For the first time, the tide was beginning to turn. The humans, despite their limited resources, had shown that they could be a force to be reckoned with.